In a world asking the question, what if the movies that got delayed came out on time and they were different? That's the case in my universe. I'm Steven Shinder and you're listening to Delayed Replay, Season 5, airing every other Saturday, unless I change my mind. Hello listeners, welcome to another episode of Delayed Replay, that podcast where we recap and review movies that got delayed in that other universe but came out on time in our universe. I'm your host, Steven Shinder, and yeah, it's actually just me on this one. This episode is on the live-action Snow White movie that in this Delayed Replay universe came out March of 2024, and there's been a bit of time of it being out, but even so, I could not find out of any of my friends anyone who felt bothered to go out and see it. And I think that really speaks to how people are so over these live action remakes of stuff that's Disney's already done. And granted, you know, the original stories, the source material didn't originate from Disney, and there have been various adaptations and permutations of some of these stories, but the company has its classic animated Snow White, which came out in the 30s. I want to say 1937, about the same year as the Hobbit book came out, weirdly enough. And the animated version, it was a childhood favorite of mine. But anyway, yeah, there's no co-host on this one, because, like I said, people couldn't be bothered to go out and see this one. But I'll do my best to make sure I have company on the next episode, which will be on the Lord of the Rings War of the Rohirrim. But yeah, the Snow White 1937 film was a childhood, or actually 1930, is it? Or, oh, okay, yeah, there was a 33 one from Paramount, but the 37 one is the Disney animated one. The very first Disney animated film, I believe. Just look it up and fact check me on that. But I'm pretty sure, whether it was at the time or retroactively became or whatever. Okay, yeah, production company, yeah, Disney. Okay. So I loved that animated film as a kid, to the point where, for whatever reason, I gravitated toward the dwarf known as Dopey. I kind of liked being called Dopey when I was a little kid, and I would pretend to be him. And funny enough, later on I would find out that the word, like calling someone a dope, that was kind of I guess rude and whatnot. And I guess I'd been watching sitcoms at that point that used it. And yeah, so I don't know how well that name has aged, really. But I guess that brings us to the names of the dwarfs in this version. They updated the names, so instead of Dopey, we have Mopey. And, you know, all these dwarf characters, they are CGI now. They look like their animated counterparts, and it's really weird. Like, they're obviously CGI. They don't look like real people. And again, I can't, like, this is the version that came out in the Delayed Replay universe, so I don't know how much of this will be true of the other universe, where it's coming out in 2025, I believe. But Yeah, so instead of Dopey, his name is Mopey, and even though he's in bright, vibrant colors, green and purple or whatever, he seems very gloomy and sad and stuff. So, yeah, it's really depressing. It feels like they're trying to make that reflective of how people feel now, but it's not fun. And like, I think that's one of the problems with some of these updates is that they don't make them as fun as the animated ones that we were so used to. And instead of Grumpy, we have Jumpy. And he seems, I guess, I don't know, they're trying to do this thing where, he looks like Grumpy from the animated version, but I don't know, maybe they felt like they needed to balance out, you got Mopey, who it seems really depressed, so it would feel kind of negative to have Grumpy, so they made him into Jumpy, and he's all about exercise, but he also gets super scared when confronted with scary things. When the dwarves go back to their home and they don't realize that Snow White has made herself at home there, and they think it's like some creature, so he's very jumpy and really scared and whatnot. It's a strange character decision right there. And instead of Happy, we have Sappy. His characteristic is not only is he very sentimental, but I guess he also eats tree sap. Apparently there are these magical trees in this magical land, and the tree sap is kind of like honey, but like it seems like it's a mix of honey and jelly in a way. It's got like a purplish color to it. So yeah, that is Sappy. And instead of Sleepy, we have Weepy, and he cries quite a lot, which gets really annoying. And again, it's really strange. They take out some of the negativity, but insert it in other characteristics of these characters. And I'll talk a bit about the casting decisions that have been talked about, like why this is kind of controversial, but just I'll get through these names first. And instead of Sneezy, we get Queasy. And it seems like he is almost always on the verge of throwing up. It's really uncomfortable. I remember someone in the theater, when I saw this, they had to step out, and I'm guessing it's because they were feeling queasy watching this character. And we also have, instead of Bashful, we have Brashful. He's very rude and assertive. Again, a complete 180 where we really did not need one. And instead of Doc, he's just called Rock because he likes collecting rocks as they mine them. Yeah, that's not going to remind us of a certain actor. But yeah, there's been some controversy around this film. I know there was discussion of like casting and whether people were concerned that these characters, they are caricatures and might not be so good for little people to play. And I think at some point it seemed like there was only going to be one little person in this cast. And I'm not entirely sure what they went with here. It's kind of confusing, especially with the CGI. But there's also the counterpoint that these very well could be jobs for seven little people. I hope I'm using that word correctly. Seven dwarves, you know. And, yeah, I hope I'm using the terminology correctly, because I know dwarfism is an actual thing. And yeah, like it kind of reminds me of the Willow TV show situation. You have this ensemble cast, and only one of the main characters is a little person. You know, just Warwick Davis as Willow. And I always thought that was strange, because if there was ever an opportunity for a an ensemble cast where you could have multiple little people and not just the one, that show would have been it. And, you know, for this version of Snow White, they're very much banking on nostalgia, using the CGI to cover up the actors regardless, and just try to harken back to the vibrant, colorful appearances of the dwarves and how they dress in the animated version. And this very much brings to mind the live-action Pinocchio film, which was not good. It's... yeah, like, this just doesn't look good in live action. When you try to take these characters and try to put them in a real world, and yeah, it's... I wish that they would stop trying this sort of thing. Like, they do this, and then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the Lion King, you know, the photorealistic version where they look like real lions, but it's bereft of the vibrant colors that made the world pop in the animated film. And, you know, also got the Mufasa prequel coming up that looks like visually it might be more of the same. So, and I'm not saying that every live action version of these Disney animated films has been bad. There have been a couple or so that I've actually quite enjoyed. Maybe in a couple instances more than the older versions. I remember preferring the live action Jungle Book that Jon Favreau directed, and maybe even the live action Aladdin. The Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland was at least something different, not a retread of the same story beats. You know, it was a bit further in the timeline, I guess you could say, and stylistically like looked different. Cruella was no. I remember kind of liking the live action 101 Dalmatians from the 90s. I think, yeah, I think I mainly remember the, you know, Cruella's henchmen, or like the comic relief in that, and I remember them more, but the dogs don't talk, so it takes away some of that charm that was in the animated version. Talked about the Mulan remake back in season 1, but yeah, I think this trend, it's just a tired trend, and I think they should focus their efforts on other projects, you know, other animated things, and also other, like, try to develop new live action IPs, or revitalize some live action things that really deserve it. I, like, just based on what I've been hearing, you know, in my universe, it feels like people don't really care all that much about these particular remakes. So, yeah, getting further into the film, in this version, you have Rachel Zegler as Snow White. You got Gal Gadot as the Evil Queen. But early on, like, one of the things that they change is that it turns out the Evil Queen is always old looking already. And, like, she had been experimenting with potions and stuff that turned her into some sort of ice queen type villain, and so her face was pretty much as white as snow. It's just that when she looks in the mirror, she sees what she wants to see, which is the youthful gal face, which we get glimpses of that, but we see a lot of this older, like, Ice Queen version. Yeah, I'm not really sure who plays her, but it's definitely a choice. I'm not sure, like, how well this really works. You know, Snow White, the story, has been adapted in various forms. I quite enjoyed the TV show Once Upon a Time for a time, but then fell off, like, beginning of season 5. Like, I think from season 3, maybe season 4, it kind of felt like they were basically just banking on, like, the Disney IPs instead of just trying to reinvent a classic story. More recently, I saw a 2000s update called Sydney White. That was really meh. I didn't really care for it. But yeah, and I remember back in the early 2010s, there were a couple different versions that felt like they were competing. There was Mirror Mirror and Snow White and the Huntsman. The latter was more of a, like, serious, dark, dramatic take, and the former was more of a comedic take. And it kind of reminds me of some of the stuff going on now, where we're getting darker versions of things that we associate with Disney but are in the public domain. So we've gotten there have been, like, some Steamboat Willie announcements and such in different media. Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2 just came out. And I think something like Blood and Honey, like, I think something like that could be taken as, like, a comedy, and that you know, it's just inherent, you know, Winnie the Pooh but horror. It's like automatically you can't not laugh at that. And here with this version of Snow White, it kind of feels like they're leaning on the nostalgia, but also weirdly in places trying to lean into some of the horror aspects. Like when the queen sends out the huntsman to eliminate Snow White, and the huntsman here being played by Ansu Kabia. The huntsman, you know, there's, like, this very Sam Raimi-esque camera angle where it's like the point of view of the knife as the huntsman is chasing her into the forest, and then Snow White, she defends herself and ends up stabbing the huntsman back, and it's not until he's on his dying breath that he realizes that what he's doing is wrong, and he regrets everything, and he says that the queen is after her, and then he dies. And I'm not really sure how I feel about this particular change. Like, in the animated version, I liked that the huntsman repented, like, right away and warned her to run away. But here it's like she's killed the huntsman, and now she's worried everyone will think she's a murderer, and so people in this kingdom are, like, after her and whatnot. She's on wanted posters, and so she has to flee. And I kind of wonder, like, if they're trying to say something about classism and different types of people and stuff, but I don't know how effective it is, really, because, you know, there's something about the presentation overall that feels very artificial, like, visually and on an emotional level. Like, it kind of feels like the actors are phoning it in here, and again here in the delayed replay version of this. And so Snow White flees to this house that belongs to the dwarves, and then she, you know, they break the stereotypes, she doesn't clean absolutely everything, but there are animals inside of the house, and she is really frightened by them. The squirrels and deer, they've like broken into the house, and they make this feel like a haunted house movie for a good like 10 minutes, and she's trying to get them out so that they don't make a mess, and then just briefly sweeps and whatnot, and that's basically the full extent. And then she goes to bed, and the dwarves, as they're mining, they make this really long unnecessary sequence where in the mines the dwarves encounter a giant shark that apparently lives in this lake that's way down in the mine. And this shark, like, it has one of the jewels that they mined and then dropped in the water, and so they're swimming trying to wrestle the gem away from the shark. And it's super ridiculous. Like, they should not be surviving this, but they do, and they make it like this intense sequence. Like, it feels like they're trying way too hard to be Jaws, but also try to keep it somewhat PG so that, it's not too alienating. And like, it feels like there's a lot of tonal dissonance in this particular remake. But yeah, they get the gem and they bring it all back to their home, and they're scared because they realize that someone has broken into their home, and they're all like frightened and hiding out, and there's like tiptoeing around, and Snow White herself is scared because she realizes there are other people in the house. But eventually they clear up what's going on. She explains that she is being hunted by the queen, and the dwarves, like, they really are put in this spot where they really question whether they should turn her in for reward money. And I know there's a whole thing in, like, Tolkien's Legendarium, for example, where dwarves are greedy, at least some of them, and they mainly care about the reward. So it rubbed me the wrong way that this version of Snow White was trying to do, like, basically make these dwarves like those other types of dwarves. I don't know, like, it's like, I don't know how they can win. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you try to do the same thing or try to make it too different, and it's like, that's why they shouldn't be trying so many of these remakes, because it's like they can't really nail it all the time. And so they live with Snow White for a bit and are again arguing amongst themselves back and forth about whether to turn her in. And eventually they do, and they, like, this was like really ridiculous and not fun to watch. They pretty much like put ropes around her hands and bring her to the Ice Queen, and she presents Snow White with this apple that is blue in this version because, the Ice Queen. And she tries to make her Snow White take a bite. And the lore here is that Snow White, like, if she takes a bite and then the queen takes a bite, then the queen will gain her youth and therefore, like, make Snow White become older. And so we actually see this effect happen. And, it's in the middle of a transformation. Both of their faces are glowing, and we see the switcheroo. But then the dwarves, they realize they were wrong to do this. So they, they try to bring Snow White to safety, and then try to break into the Queen's laboratory, trying to figure out like how to reverse this whole thing. And so the way that they do this is they find a tea kettle. And so what they need to do is make some apple flavored tea and basically make it so that they have to make it from the apple, the blue apple, which they managed to snag. And then once they do that, they have to make both the Queen and Snow White drink it. So they're able to make Snow White drink it without problem. But then they have to basically go to the Queen, and they fight off the guards. They use their pickaxes as weapons, which admittedly was kind of cool to see. Like, they get to actually use these things. And now, because of the type of movie this is, it's not violent, but we see guards sort of get defeated and fall to the side. We don't get the details, obviously, but yeah, the dwarves get to the Queen and they basically throw it in her face. It felt very, the witch and the Wizard of Oz, throwing the water. Very much to the point where it looks like the Ice Queen is melting. Because, of course, she's the Ice Queen. But then, once she becomes a puddle of water, it kind of becomes a huge thing of this steam this steam cloud that just sort of explodes for no reason, just for the visual effects. And so after this happens, Snow White enters the room and she looks just like she did before. And now, because the Queen is destroyed, the citizens of this kingdom, the civilians and whatnot, it turns out they were under the Queen's spell. They never really liked her. But now that she's been destroyed, they've come to their senses. And so they basically applaud Snow White and the 7 dwarves. And then one of the civilians asks if he can go out on a date with Snow White, saying that he can have the manners of a prince, and she sort of does a read on him and is like, well, you are charming. And it's such a stupid shout out there. It's so dumb. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Oh, I forgot to mention, while the dwarves were, while Snow White was living with the dwarves, there was this random scene where an ogre attacked their home, and so they were fighting off this ogre, and he was a grayish shade of green, and they do defeat him and basically throw him into a swamp. And it's okay, we know what you're doing there. You're not so subtle. This is supposed to be a knock on Shrek, which was a knock on Disney movies. And yeah, we know what's going on here. So yeah, stuff like that really took me out of this movie. And yeah, I don't know, maybe this could have been great somehow, but it just came off feeling hollow, and what was the point of it all anyway? And yeah, I'm just disenchanted with these Disney remakes. Whenever a new one gets announced, I'm just ugh, this again. And I would rather they take chances with newer things, even at the risk of it not being as recognizable as these really old IPs, I'd rather they take chances than throw darts at a wall with these IPs they've become super reliant on. And also there's the newer versions of the songs. The Wishing Well song is kind of more poppy. It's like, I'm wishing, I'm wishing, I'm wishing. And it's like too quick paced for me, so it kind of loses some of the charm and feels like I'm watching a commercial on Disney Channel or something. The dwarves singing, "I ho, it's off to work we go." You know, they do that pretty much the same as in the original. But it feels like they basically just lifted it from the 37 version instead of re-recording a new version. It's like, okay, what's the point? Like, what? And the song "Someday My Prince Will Come" is very melancholic. Like, it kind of has a bring me to life aesthetic to it that just doesn't really work. Like, someday my prince will come. It's just, yeah, it doesn't really work. It really feels like the wishing well scene is a metaphor for them continuously going back to the well rather than trying to do something new. And there's also the post-credit scene that is basically like the one at the end of the Pirates movie we talked about last year. Snow White and the dwarves. You got Disney here, and they meet like the Once Upon a Time versions of the Snow White characters, and other Disney characters are there as well, and it's like this really felt thrown in at the last minute. Like, there was no planning whatsoever, and I don't think they have a roadmap or an idea of what all of this is supposed to go to. It's just all an attempt at hype or whatever. Like, I don't think they have this well thought out. This isn't going to be like Kingdom Hearts big, really. So, yeah, there's not much else to say about this on my part, so just go to final thoughts and score. This just further reinforces that they really do not need to do these remakes. And based on the attendance in the theater I went to, like, not many people really care about these anymore. So, maybe it was like that in other theaters as well. I hope that they get the message and don't think it's like, oh, it's because we didn't do this enough or we left that out. Like, I just hope that they take the message and go from there. So, yeah, there wasn't much that I really liked in this. I've definitely seen worse films, but it's just felt like really artificial and lifeless. Like, it could have been much better, but I don't really know how they could have made it much better. It's just, I'm over these types of movies, so I'm just gonna give this a 3.5 out of 10 pickaxes. So, yeah, that's it for Snow White 2024. As for my plugs, people can follow me at Steven Shinder on social media, Steven Shinder Storytelling on Facebook, and I'll put my Goodreads and Letterboxd links in the show notes as well. And go to stevenshinder.com and find the Standalones and Stepping Stones novel series that I've written / am writing. It's on Amazon. And find me on you can email this podcast via delayedreplaypodcast@gmail.com. Let us know your thoughts on apples. Yeah, in Sydney White, there was such a goofy update on the Apple idea where it's like an Apple computer. Is so silly. And you can also find me on Yesshift. It's a podcast I do with my dad. It's music related. There's a fun April Fool's Day thing that we did with Yes Music podcast recently. So you can go ahead and check that out. And, well, I'll let my other self talk about some other stuff going on YouTube. So, without further delay, here's my other self from that other universe. Hey everyone, this is Steven Shinder from that other universe. So the news is the launch of a new YouTube channel called Steven Shinder Reviews in Video Form. Yeah, it's basically what it sounds like. I've been starting to review some things that like they're sort of shortish videos. They're not as long as delayed replay podcast episodes. So far I've talked a little bit about Planet of the Apes, the Star Wars Tales of the Empire trailer, which looks really good, and something for Star Trek. I talked a little bit about the Star Trek novel where Data tries writing a novel and sort of comparing that to the climate today with like AI and whatnot. So yeah, it's an experiment and seeing where this goes. Going to be continuing this Planet of the Apes review series and also talk about some of these other properties that I want to talk about. And yeah, we'll see how this goes. And as for what I've been watching recently, so no spoilers, Invincible Season 2 wrapped up, and it was such a great finale. Really looking forward to Season 3, because it was super intense, and I'm sure Season 3 will be intense as well. Still enjoying X-Men 97. The Bad Batch, the Ventress episode, I thought like her role could have been filled by anyone else who's a Force user, but the 2 episodes after that make me feel really invested in the show again, because all season I haven't really been into the Bad Batch Season 3, and this is the final season, so hopefully these last couple episodes, which have gotten me more invested, will keep me interested going forward, and hopefully they'll stick the landing. I really don't know how they're going to wrap up this show, but I guess we'll see. And as for movies, I've looked at listings of like what's playing, and there have been some things that I've sort of wanted to see, like Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2 and Imaginary looked like they could be a somewhat interesting double feature, even though I've seen that the reviews for Imaginary have not been good, although Blood and Honey 2 apparently got some good reception, which is surprising. Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire. I've talked about how -1 got me more interested in the Godzilla franchise, but I don't know, it's feeling like a big ask these days with how busy I am to just go out and see these movies. And I hate that there's a tiny part of me that looks at the titles like The New Empire and Frozen Empire, oh, maybe double feature, but then I remind myself, wait, no, I don't care about Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. So it just really goes to show the effects of marketing. And Kung Fu Panda 4, haven't watched it either, even though I was kind of interested, but at this point I feel like I'm not really going to go out to the movies that much. I feel like I would need to have friends invite me, if anything, and that'll encourage me a bit more. I am for sure going to see Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes when it's out in theaters, because, of course. And Dune Part 2, I've tried with each of the Dune adaptations after listening to the audiobook. The audiobook and the adaptations are all kind of okay to me, so I'm not a huge Dune fan. I know that people are saying Part 2 is incredible, but I just can't be bothered to go out to see it. I'm gonna catch it on Max, I guess, whenever it drops on there. So, yeah, I've just been really busy with work and various things, and I really have to prioritize my time and can't go out to see many movies, and frankly don't feel like going out to see them that much. So yeah, I don't know if that sounds like kind of a bummer to some people, but that's just the way things are. So yeah, it's basically my update. I'm not really sure what else to add, but yeah, the delayed replay podcast will be back in 2 weeks, and it'll continue releasing throughout the year, of course. So that's it for me for now, and without further delay, have a good day.